June 15th, 1944, the Higgins boat bucked in the surf like a wounded animal, taking every shell the Japanese could throw at it. Water leapt in sheets. Shrapnel hissed past like angry hornets, and crouched in the front of that steel box was a 29-year-old Marine lieutenant with 30,000 enemy soldiers waiting for him on the beach. His name was Frank Tachovsky. Behind him were 40 men. Nobody else in the Marine Corps wanted fighters, thieves, troublemakers, bruisers pulled straight from the brig and punishment details. Some had been arrested for assault. One had been a boxer. One had once stood guard for a Chicago gangster. A few had been given a simple, brutal choice: military prison or a unit with a 73% casualty rate. They chose the unit. The ramp dropped at 8:47 a.m. Machine-gun fire shredded the surf. Mortars walked across the sand. Men died before they reached dry land. And Tachovsky's platoon, this strange experiment, the Marine Corps barely understood, was already moving inland, slipping into the jungle faster than any regular unit could possibly follow. Their orders were insane: find the Japanese, map their fortifications, kill silently, operate alone, send back coordinates, stay alive behind enemy lines for days at a time, no reinforcements, no rescue, no forgiveness for mistakes. Officially, they were scout sniper platoons. Unofficially, they were something the Marine Corps had never seen before. And over the next 48 hours, these 40 thieves, these criminals in uniform, would discover a Japanese tank battalion, prevent the destruction of an American command post, ride stolen bicycles through a Japanese-held capital, crawl through caves full of artillery, and lose nearly a quarter of their men before sundown. This is the story of the men the Corps tried to forget, and the platoon that saved thousands of Marines on Saipan. They called them criminals. Tachovsky called them survivors. The Marine Corps sent its cleanest, sharpest men to the rifle companies. Tachovsky did the opposite. He walked straight into the brig. His rule was simple: when two Marines fight, the winner goes to the brig and the loser goes to the infirmary. Tachovsky wanted the winner. The Marine Corps saw violence. He saw a man who wouldn't fold when the world collapsed around him. One by one, he collected them. A professional boxer with fists like cinder blocks. A former bodyguard who once worked for a Chicago mobster. A thief who could hotwire a jeep faster than a mechanic could start one. A 17-year-old bruiser who had lied about his age, and a 34-year-old brawler who had never once walked away from a fight. Many had criminal records before enlistment. Most carried disciplinary charges inside the Corps. All of them chose this platoon because the other choice was military prison. Camp Tarawa, Hawaii, was their forge. For 6 months, they learned things ordinary Marines were never taught. How to slip behind a man and break his neck without a sound. How to kill with a knife in a single movement. How to read Japanese maps, interpret captured documents, call in naval gunfire, and disappear into jungle terrain without disturbing a leaf. They practiced with M1903 Springfields fitted with 8 power scopes, hitting man-sized silhouettes at 600 yards. They memorized Japanese fortification doctrine. They dismantled and rebuilt bazookas blindfolded. And they stole it. Constantly. Marines were the poorest equipped branch in 1944s, often using leftovers from the First World War. So Tachovsky's men raided army supply depots, borrowed Navy equipment, even lifted trucks and jeeps whenever it suited the mission. Within weeks, their regiment nicknamed them the 40 Thieves. Its name is Stick. June 15th arrived like a clenched fist. Saipan wasn't just another island, it was Japanese home territory. Tokyo is called a sacred ground. The garrison numbered close to 30,000 soldiers and sailors, along with armed civilians, prepared to fight to the death. Every beach was pre-registered for artillery. Every ridge held machine gun nests. Every valley was covered by a sniper fire. Marine planners estimated casualty rates above 50%. Scout sniper recon platoons in the Pacific averaged 70+% loss. Tachovsky told his men the truth. Most of us won't make it back. The first wave hit hell. Mortars churned the water. Machine guns crackled across the landing zones. Men were torn apart before they reached the seawall. And yet Tachovsky's platoon moved with a kind of violent grace, fanning into the jungle while most units were still pinned to the beach. By 9:30 a.m., they were over 300 yards inland, alone. No friendly units within sight, no radio chatter except their own whispered updates. Somewhere ahead were thousands of Japanese soldiers who didn't know 40. American thieves were slipping between their lines. At 10:15 a.m., Sergeant Bill Canoopel found a concrete pillbox hidden inside the ridge. A Type 92 heavy machine gun covered all 3 routes Marine units would use later that afternoon. Anyone walking into that valley would die. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Tachovsky didn't hesitate. Private Marvin Strombo crawled within 80 yards, shouldered his bazooka, and fired a single rocket straight through the firing slit. The explosion killed the entire crew instantly. Before the dust settled, the platoon was already moving deeper into the jungle. Hours later, when the 2nd Marine Division swept through that valley, they met no machine gun fire. That one shot saved an unknown number of lives. By noon, the 40 thieves had mapped 17 more Japanese positions, machine gun nests, mortar pits, artillery observers, ammo dumps. Tachovsky radioed coordinates in code. 20 minutes later, 5-inch naval shells screamed overhead and erased each target. The Marines watched from cover as Japanese defenses vanished under geysers of fire and smoke. But the biggest surprise came at 3:40 p.m. Hidden beneath camouflage netting north of Charankanoa sat 37 Japanese Type 97 medium tanks, 3 times the number Marine intelligence believed existed on Saipan. A night tank charge could tear the American beachhead open and reach supply dumps in minutes. If those tanks hit at dusk, the invasion might collapse before it even began. Tachovsky's instinct said attack, but logic said suicide. His platoon carried 6 bazookas, 36 rockets, 37 tanks. Then the engines started. 37 diesels roared to life. Infantry poured from dugouts. Officers waved flags and shouted orders. This wasn't a reposition, it was preparation for a full-scale assault. Tachovsky made the call, shadow them. No engaging. No heroic. Feed headquarters real-time coordinates and pray the Marines could build a defensive wall in time. From 5:07 p.m. onward, the 40 thieves ghosted the tank formation, 200 yards off the flank, invisible in the undergrowth. Every 10 minutes, Tachovsky whispered updated locations. On the beach, the Marines scrambled, Shermans rumbled forward, bazookas were passed hand-to-hand through the trenches, artillery zeroed in. At 7:05 p.m., the Japanese changed direction. They weren't heading for the main landing beaches. They were swinging north, aiming straight for a narrow gap between the 2nd and 4th Marine Division's seam, defended by barely 300 Marines. If the tanks broke through, the American line would split in half. The attack hit at 7:23 p.m. 3 Japanese tanks exploded under bazooka fire. But 34 more pushed through, infantry swarming behind them, screaming, firing, charging. Marine lines bent. Defensive positions are buckled. Within minutes, the tanks were approaching the 6th Marine Regiment's command to post itself. One Japanese tank peeled off, following a ravine directly toward Colonel Risley's headquarters. If it smashed that command post, the Marines' entire defensive coordination would collapse. Tachovsky grabbed his best bazooka gunner, Private Herbert Hodges, and sprinted downhill. They reached a firing position 30 yards from the tank's path. At 7:31 p.m., the Type 97 rolled into view, turret rotating, commander scanning with binoculars. Hodges waited. 10 yards, 9, 8. The tank paused. Hodges fired. The rocket slammed under the turret ring, detonating inside the crew's compartment. The tank erupted, ammunition cooking off in a fireball visible across the jungle. Japanese infantry, seeing the explosion, assumed they'd stumbled onto a fortified Marine strongpoint and redirected their attack away from the command post. That one bazooka shot saved the regiment. But the muzzle flash also exposed Tachovsky's platoon to hundreds of Japanese soldiers less than 500 yards away. And now the darkness came alive with gunfire. By the time the sun set on June 15th, the 40 thieves were scattered across the jungle in 4 and fireman teams, withdrawing under fire with Japanese patrols hunting them like animals. Shadows moved everywhere. Flashlights were cut through the trees. Enemy voices shout commands in every direction. The platoon wasn't just behind Japanese lines, they were inside them. At 8:05 p.m., Private Strombo's team lay hidden in shoulder-high brush while a Japanese patrol passed within 10 feet. One soldier stopped, turned, stared directly into the darkness where Strombo lay flat against the earth. 43 silent seconds passed, long enough sweat to pool in the Marine's eyes, long enough to hear his own heartbeat thudding like a drum. Then the soldier moved on. Strombo exhaled only when the patrol disappeared. By 9:41 p.m., only 23 Marines reached the rally point behind U.S. lines. 17 were missing. Some were dead. Some captured. Some were lost in the dark. Tachovsky wanted to go back immediately, but enemy patrols were closing in on the area. If they stayed, the entire platoon could be wiped out. At dawn, the search began. The first body was found at 7:05 a.m. Private Evans, shot through the chest. His dog tags were gone. The Japanese often took them as trophies. 3 more Marines were discovered later, executed with their hands tied and bayoneted. They had been wounded, captured, and murdered, not uncommon for Saipan, where surrender was considered dishonorable. But 6 men were found alive, crawling back separately through gaps in the lines. 5 more were trapped inside a cave system nearly a mile behind Japanese positions. They were dehydrated, sick, low on ammunition, and pinned by patrols hunting them in circles. Tachovsky didn't hesitate. He formed a rescue team and went. The extraction was chaos. A 20-man Japanese patrol nearly stumbled directly into them, Tachovsky ordered. A shaped ambush of 11 Marines firing in a single synchronized burst. 7 seconds later, 20 Japanese soldiers were dead. The silence returned, but every unit nearby would have heard that firefight. They ran. Minutes later, they hit the ravine. A 40-foot drop on both sides with Japanese forces flooding in behind them. Grenades burst against the rocks. Machine-gun rounds chopped into the dirt. One Marine took a shrapnel in his arm, another bullet through the thigh. The ravine dead-ended in a box canyon way out. That's when Tachovsky noticed something. The far wall wasn't solid. A crack. Vegetation growing over trickling watering of a fissure. One by one, dragging their wounded, they slipped through a slit in the rock barely wide enough to scrape through sideways. On the other hand, the fissure opened into a winding passage. Total darkness. They moved by touch, hands on the shoulder ahead, dragging gear behind them, hearing Japanese soldiers shouting just outside. At 2:07 p.m. they emerged 400 yards behind the ridge, unseen, alive. By mid-afternoon, 34 men were accounted for. 8 were still missing. 3 more would eventually turn up alive. The rest were dead. The 40 thieves were down to 37 men, and their next mission was worse. On June 17th, before sunrise, they slipped into the interior ridge system, a maze of cliffs, caves, and artillery chambers carved into the volcanic rock. Japanese gunners had mastered a deadly rhythm. Fire a few rounds, then roll the gun deeper into the tunnels before U.S. counter-battery could respond. That's why Marines on the beach kept dying, despite calling accurate coordinates. Finding the guns meant crawling into the mountain itself. Corporal Mullins and Private Strombo volunteered. Their flashlights, shielded to glow only a few feet, lit wet stone walls streaked with soot and human waste. They found the first 105mm howitzer 30 feet inside a side chamber. The crew was asleep elsewhere. Ammunition-filled alcoves carved into the rock. Deeper inside was sleeping bunks, storage rooms, and a command post. Then voices, footsteps, a patrol approaching. Mullins and Strombo pressed themselves into an alcove so small they could barely breathe as 12 Japanese soldiers marched past, close enough to touch. They came out with a complete map of the cave Sistema blueprint Marine engineers would later use to seal and destroy positions that had been killing U.S. forces for days. And then came Garapan. The old administrative capital had been shelled and bombed into rubble, but Japanese troops still used it as a staging area, supply dump, small headquarters, officer billets. Marine intelligence needed to know how many soldiers were there and what strength they were. 5 Marines, including Ratchicentrid, the town at 4:41 p.m. At 5:08 p.m., Strombo spotted 5 bicycles leaning against a shattered building, Japanese military bikes used for courier work. 5 Marines. 5 bicycles. It was insane. It was perfect. They climbed aboard and pedaled straight into the heart of Japanese-held Garapan. Casual, unhurried, weaving through ruins as if delivering messages. Japanese soldiers waved at them. Officers nodded. A sentry shouted something in Japanese. Tachovsky lifted a hand and pretended to acknowledge the order. For 43 minutes, they mapped enemy troops, counted supply stockpiles, and marked artillery staging points. 5 American Marines rode through an enemy capital in broad daylight, and nobody noticed. They returned at 7:32 p.m. Their reconnaissance later shaped the assault plans that captured Garapan with far fewer casualties than predicted. For 3 more weeks, 40 thieves kept working. Mapping positions, ambushing patrols, surviving malaria, dysentery, and exhaustion, stealing food from Japanese caches, drinking filthy water from streams, watching civilians forced off cliffs rather than surrender, seeing wounded, Americans executed, losing friends one by one. By the time Saipan was declared secure on July 9th, 12 of Tachovsky's men were dead and 9 were wounded, 56% casualty rate. Lower than expected but devastating. And yet Marine commanders estimated the 40 thieves' work reduced overall Marine casualties by 15%, saving roughly 2,000 American lives. They were never given medals for that. They were barely mentioned in reports. Their story vanished for 66 years. But the war wasn't done with them, not even close.